So today we're going to talk about slavery in ancient Rome. So slavery in ancient Rome wasn't simply about the slaves being subservient to their masters. It was a lot more complicated and honestly interesting than that. So yes, the Romans did conquer a lot of other civilizations and then take their peoples under themselves. But one of the important aspects about why Romans were able to justify slavery and essentially the oppression of other people was because they saw themselves as superior to everybody else. Slavery was embedded in Roman culture from basically its inception. In the Greek mythology of the origins of Rome, Romulus gives Roman fathers the right to sell their sons into slavery, and this was in order to further the development of the Roman Empire and state. So slavery wasn't viewed as something bad, rather something that was almost necessary. We needed it to improve the state. We needed it to drive the empire further. So slavery wasn't seen by Romans as an oppression of other people, but it was seen as something that was necessary to develop their own culture. And in some ways, they even saw it as an exertion of their own divine right to other people, because they saw themselves as superior to many of the other civilizations that they conquered.
Slaves played important roles in ancient Roman society and economy. While doing manual labor, many slaves also worked at highly skilled jobs. Slaves worked in agriculture, in mines, in manufacturing industries, transportation, education, where they brought knowledge of different places to Rome, in the service industries, in homes, and in construction. The ancient Romans heavily relied on slaves to build things and assist with work. Women often worked as hairdressers, dressmakers, cooks, and servants. Other public slaves built the roads, repaired the aqueducts, and built other buildings in Rome. Slaves from Greece tended to be more educated and would be used as teachers for the children of a house. The slaves' lives also depended on their jobs. Household slaves had the easiest lives next to publicly owned slaves, while slaves that worked in mines or quarries often lived and died in them. Working in the mines was often considered the most brutal of all jobs. The slaves working in mines couldn't buy their freedom like most slaves and even died in the mines. Another role of slaves in ancient Rome is as gladiators. These gladiators served as entertainment for the people while risking their own lives.
To build these powerful cities, Rome needed manpower. While many of the people from conquered lands became citizens, many more were auctioned off as slaves. Thousands of these slaves were educated and secured positions as philosophers, musicians, dancers, and teachers. But tens of thousands more were forced into brutal manual labor.
Slave life depended on what type of slave you were and how much you were paid for when your master bought you. A good master looked after a good slave as an equally good replacement might be hard to acquire or expensive. For example, a good cook was highly prized, as entertaining was very important to Rome's elite, and rich families tried to outdo each other when banquets were held, hence the importance of owning a good cook, which would be the slave. A slave's typical day began at daybreak. If a master lived in cold climate, the first job of the day would be to fire up the fire pit. When his master awoke, a slave would be expected to assist dressing him. When the day properly began, a whole group of slaves started set tasks, such as walking the children to school, cleaning a villa, washing clothes, tidying a garden, etc. A group of slaves would work in the kitchen, preparing the day's meals. When a rich man and his families bathed at home, slaves would help out by drying them once they had finished and dressed them. When a master moved around, the slaves would carry him in a litter. When a master entertained, slaves would ensure a constant supply of food and drink. If guests had to return home and it was dark, a slave or slaves would walk ahead of them with a lighted torch. The plebeians rarely had slaves because of the high cost of slaves. If any, they had one or two at most, and the patricians had many slaves, ranging from garden keepers, cooks, personal assistants, to teachers for the patricians' children to be educated.